I'm Sam. Welcome to Brickwall Pictures. Today we're going to be doing something fun, and we're going to be crowning the best Western of all time. That is not the best Western hotel or motel or whatever. We're talking about Western films. We're going to be going through a single elimination bracketed tournament. Here's a quick peek at the full bracket. It looks a little weird. I don't know why it's structured like this, that some are getting a free advance to the next round, but I guess it's how we're going. I guess it's because the number ahead is lopsided. I don't know why it can't just put The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance and Vampires in a bracket against each other for some reason, but that's how it is structured. I don't know how this bracketing shit works, but that's how this site decided to put them in. It's not letting me change them, so we're gonna roll with it. The end result will be the same. There are 55 Westerns in this bracket. We're gonna be looking at 55 Westerns and whittling them down to crown the best Western ever made. This is including, by the way, neo-Westerns, not just like old school traditional Westerns. And some of these are maybe only like partially Westerns, or they're like Western flavored. I will be factoring in how strongly they are a Western into the ranking. So the like neo-Westerns that are like only partly Western, that will count against them potentially, depending on who they are matched up against. There also, one little bit of housekeeping is I will acknowledge that there's a little bit of a gap for me in my viewing experience of the like old Hollywood system Westerns, meaning the Westerns of like the 50s and early 60s. There's a little bit of a gap there, so there are some like pretty big omissions. But what we'll do is we'll consider this the Brickwall Pictures 2022 Best Western. So for this year. In the future, I can revisit this, and the winner of this tournament can go up against all fresh Westerns that will be first-time watches and see if it can defend its title. So that's something that we can revisit in the future. And in that revisited one, I will be sure to include movies like High Noon, Stagecoach, and like some of the really big ones that aren't in here currently. Okay, so these are in a randomized order. The order just got randomized again in between the little cut that you just saw. I accidentally got randomized it again. So that's why it looks a little different than what you just saw when I was zoomed out. But we have our first pairing here. Whichever wins this is going to face Bone Tomahawk, which got a free pass to the first round. That's not me intentionally putting it there. That's just randomized seating order. Or there is no seating. It's just completely randomized order. But our first pairing is The Quick and the Dead versus Rango. I will say, if you watched my Best Director of All Time tournament video, that one I put in only filmmakers who I thought were great and had a shot at making it. In this one, this is the last little bit of housekeeping. In this one, I just put in like every Western, pretty much just every Western I've seen, any movie that's a Western. So there are going to be some easily defeated titles in here. There are going to be some outside the box picks as well. But so here we go. Okay, The Quick and the Dead versus Rango. Rango is the animated movie where Johnny Depp voices some kind of lizard. What is he, a gecko? A chameleon? Is that what he is? I don't know. I've seen it a couple times actually, but I don't remember what kind of animal he is. It's actually a surprisingly good Western for being like an animated. Is it a kids movie? It's a little more adult in theme than a lot of kids movies, but I don't think it's like full of swearing or whatever, but there's like some violence and stuff, so I don't know. I think The Quick and the Dead is going to take it though. The Quick and the Dead, if you haven't seen it, this is the Western that Sam Raimi made. It's full of shootouts. It's basically just a bunch of shootouts and showdowns and Sam Raimi having a fun-ass time behind the camera doing all kinds of wild stuff and then blowing up the whole set when he's done with it. It's a fun one. Okay, next up we have Blazing Saddles versus True Grit. So one is a strong Western, the other one is a parody Western. By the way, for True Grit, I am using the Coen Brothers version instead of the John Wayne version. So parody Western comedy from Mel Brooks, the Blazing Saddles one, versus True Grit, which is a legit true to form Western from the Coen Brothers with great performances and lots of idiosyncrasies and whatnot. It's tough to compare because one is a committed, respectable entry in the genre, and the other is making fun of the whole genre. So it's a little hard to compare the two. True Grit's really good. I think I'm going to give Blazing Saddles the win here. I don't think Blazing Saddles will go all the way, but I think it is going to go forward. And True Grit is one that could go a little further if it was in a different pairing. Okay, the next pairing is The Good, the Bad, the Ugly versus Vampires. This is John Carpenter's Vampires. This could not be more lopsided. It's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Vampires is not a good movie at all. But it is a Western flavored movie from from one John Carpenter. I talked about it in my John Carpenter tier list. This is probably the most lopsided matchup we're going to see in the whole tournament. Okay, Once Upon a Time in the West versus the Magnificent Seven. It's going to be Once Upon a Time in the West. I think that's a pretty easy pick. Okay, Young Ones versus Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. If you're not familiar, Young Ones, because it's one of the more obscure ones, it's a post-apocalyptic Western. It's also like a vignette film that has, I think, like 3 storylines. I really liked the first one that had Michael Shannon in it. I didn't really care about the other vignettes. And anyway, Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid is an all-time great. This is one of my personal favorite movies. I could see this going all the way, though I might try to factor out my bias depending on what it matches up against. We'll see. Treasure of the Sierra Madre versus For a Few Dollars More. Now, here's the thing. I think Treasure of the Sierra Madre is a better movie, but it is less of a Western. I included that in this list because it came up when it's categorized as a Western, and it came up when I was searching for Westerns to like remind myself of all the Westerns I've seen. Treasure of the Sierra Madre doesn't seem like a Western to me. I guess it does have kind of a Western setting, and there is like shootout stuff going on, but it doesn't feel like a Western. It's more of like a drama about paranoia. It's about like panning for gold and stuff. For a Few Dollars More is definitely more of a Western, like capital W Western. Even though I do think Treasure of the Sierra Madre is a better film, I'm going to go with For a Few Dollars More because we're looking at the best Western, and the genre vibes factor into that. Okay, next up is this is actually an interesting one. The Wild Bunch versus the Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, to give it its full title, which doesn't even fit in the bracket. It's a pretty tough one. One's a classic, one's more modern. The Assassination of Jesse James is just so beautiful, and the soundtrack is so great. The soundtrack by Nick Cave and Warren Ellis, by the way. I got Nick Cave on my hat. That's a little coincidence. I didn't even think about that. Nick Cave, that's Nick Cave on my hat, if you couldn't tell. Wild Bunch is a great shootout, obviously. The whole climax is phenomenal. I think I'm going to go Assassination of Jesse James on this one. Okay, next up is The Harder They Fall versus Sukiyaki Western Django. I feel like each of these on their own would be a pretty easy elimination if they went up against some of the top dogs. So I don't expect them to get past the next round. Out of these two, so The Harder They Fall was a recent, I think it was a Netflix original, or at least like it got like bought by Netflix and came out as a Netflix original. From, I believe the director's name is James Samuels or something like that. It's enjoyable. There's tons of action, charismatic characters, fun cast, but it's a little more middle of the road, and it's pretty simplistic. Sukiyaki Western Django is a Japanese Western. The reason why this one's kind of obscure, I think, the reason why I watched this one in particular is because Quentin Tarantino is in it as an actor, and I found it fascinating that he was in a movie that had Django in the title before he made Django Unchained. Django Unchained was obviously referencing the old Franco Nero Django spaghetti westerns, but it's interesting that he was in a movie that had Django in the title before Django Unchained. I don't think either of these are like phenomenal. I think I'm going to give the edge to The Harder They Fall. Okay, Tombstone versus The Revenant. These are two good movies. I like The Revenant a whole lot. I've seen some kind of weird backlash for it recently. Revenant's one of those movies that like everyone loved, and then it became popular to like kind of hate on. I don't know why that happens with movies from time to time, but it does. I'm not saying you can't criticize it. You can totally criticize it. It just seems like a lot of people kind of change their tune on it spontaneously. I don't know why that happens. But anyway, Tombstone's a classic. I think Tombstone is going to take the edge. Such a good cast, man. Michael Biehn, Kurt Russell, Val Kilmer, Bill Paxton, Sam Elliott. Like, what a fucking cast as far as like westerns go. Also directed by, I think his name is George P. Cosmatos, and he's the director. He's the father of Panos Cosmatos. If you didn't know, the guy who did Mandy so many years later. I think Tombstone's got to win. It's also more of a like traditional Western, feels more like a capital W Western, which is going to be a deciding factor in a lot of these. Lonesome Dove versus The Sisters Brother. Lonesome Dove is definitely the classic of the two. It's also like, it's kind of a film, but it's also kind of a mini-series. It's like a two-parter, or maybe it's three-parter. It's extremely long. I actually think it's too long. It's the more classic pick, whereas The Sisters Brothers is recent. It's from just a couple of years ago. I loved The Sisters Brothers, and I did not expect to. I just talked about it in my year recap video a little bit, my Everything I Watched 2022 video. I did not expect to love The Sisters Brothers as much as I did. I thought it was a phenomenal Western. Sisters Brothers is going to take the win here. overcoming a classic of the genre. And last up, No Country for Old Men versus Near Dark. Both of these are like atypical westerns. No Country for Old Men takes the easy win here, though. It's not even close. Okay, that's everything in the left-hand half of the bracket for that first round, but we have a whole other side of the bracket. Way of the Gun versus Wild West. Okay. It's Way of the Gun. Come on. Okay, maybe this might have been even more lopsided than... actually, no. Good, the Bad, the Ugly versus Vampires. You can't get any more lopsided than that. But that was a pretty close one as far as lopsided goes. Okay, The Searchers versus Hell or High Water. Now, I'm going to go way off the beaten path here, and I'm going to pick Hell or High Water. Even though I don't even love Hell or High Water or anything, I think Hell or High Water is pretty good. But I just think The Searchers is pretty good. I watched it recently. When I did my Sight and Sound poll reaction video, I hadn't seen The Searchers yet. If I had seen The Searchers, I would have given it a thumbs down because I think it's pretty good. I don't think it's bad. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but I struggle to see why it is considered one of the all-time great films ever made. I do not think it's anywhere near being that good. Hell or High Water is going to take it by a slight margin by virtue of The Searchers being massively overrated in my estimation. Okay, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance versus Slow West. This is a pretty lopsided one. Man Who Shot Liberty Valance takes this pretty easily. A Fistful of Dollars versus Dead Man. Now, I think most people would go A Fistful of Dollars. If it was either of the other Dollars trilogy movies versus Dead Man, they would win. I think I might actually prefer Dead Man over the first A Fistful of Dollars. Now, I do think the series gets better. I think For a Few Dollars More and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly are both better than A Fistful of Dollars, substantially. But A Fistful of Dollars is still great, and it's got some classic moments, like that, first shootout. I really like Dead Man. I talked about it on my Jim Jarmusch tier list. Go check out that video. I think I'm going to give it to Dead Man. Okay, Heaven's Gate versus Dances with Wolves. These are two big, kind of epic in scope westerns. Heaven's Gate was a notorious failure, and it was pretty critically ravished at the time. It was director Michael Cimino's follow-up to Deer Hunter, and he went Best Picture winner, one of the highly, highly acclaimed movies, to complete bomb immediately afterward, destroyed his career immediately. And it was a really expensive movie too that completely failed. I do think it is better than that Reputation would have you believe, though. I think it's quite good. But Dances with Wolves is going to take the cake here. Okay, Go West versus Logan. Go West is the old Buster Keaton movie. I think I'm going to go Logan. I would be surprised if Logan goes much further than this. Logan is the Wolverine movie. It's a decidedly atypical Western, a neo-Western. Okay, next up. Oh, this is fucking lopsided as hell. High Plains Drifter versus Cowboys and Aliens. High Plains Drifter is going to win. Power of the Dog versus Django Unchained. Power of the Dog is really good. I feel like a lot of people who don't like Power of the Dog, because it got quite a lot of backlash. One is from people who are, I think, just homophobic. Two is from people who just don't like art house movies and were expecting something else. Three is from people who were expecting more of a Western. Power of Dog is a Western in setting, but it's not a Western in story or themes or style. Django Unchained, on the other hand, is very much a spaghetti Western flavored movie, and Django Unchained's going to move forward for that reason, for feeling more like a Western. Okay, The Nightingale versus The Outlaw, Josey Wales. One is a Clint Eastwood classic. The other is a more recent movie that kind of flew under the radar. This was Jennifer Kent's second movie after The Babadook. I prefer it over The Babadook. It feels like a Western in a lot of ways, but it's set in Australia in the outback, which isn't exactly a one-to-one facsimile for the West, though there is at least one more Australian Western included in this ranking. It's actually the next pairing. It's The Proposition. It feels like a drama. It feels like a thriller. It feels like a horror movie at points. There's a lot going on in The Nightingale, so it doesn't feel as much like a tried and true Western through and through. Whereas The Outlaw Josey Wales is definitely a capital W Western. I don't like The Outlaw Josey Wales as much as some people do. I think it's good. I think it's pretty good. I kind of feel the same way about The Searchers, where I think it's a little overrated, though Josey Wales doesn't have as ridiculous as a reputation as The Searchers. I think I'm going to give it to The Nightingale, even though it is being held back a little bit by its genre fusion stuff. The Good, the Bad, and the Weird, not The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, The Good, the Bad, and the Weird, far less known, but this is a South Korean Western, versus The Proposition. This one is fucking tough for me. These are both less popular, less mainstreamy kind of westerns. If these were on opposite sides of the bracket, I could see them both making it all the way to like the semifinals or the finals. Going up against each other in the first round is tough. I love both of these movies. The Proposition is an Australian western, but even that change in setting, it still does feel more like a traditional through and through western than The Good, the Bad, and the Weird, which is definitely it's a self-proclaimed kimchi western, which is like kind of like a nickname for South Korean westerns, which there aren't many other South Korean westerns. I don't know if I've seen another South Korean western that was so thoroughly a western. It's set in olden Manchuria, and it's not like there's like horse riding and stuff, but there are also vehicles and like there's like a car that gets driven around and stuff. So it's a little more modern than some. There's a lot going on. It's a big, huge, bombastic action movie. I love it. It's honestly like up there with my favorite movies ever. It's a little bit less of a western than Proposition, which might hold it back, and I love The Proposition so much. I think I gotta go with The Good, the Bad, and the Weird, though, because I want to rewatch it right now just thinking about it. This is a really tough one. This is the toughest matchup so far. Okay, In a Valley of Violence versus The Shooting. In a Valley of Violence is a Thai western. He's got West in his name. The Shooting is an old school western with Jack Nicholson in the villain role, actually, not the good guy role. And it's a pretty solid western. The Shooting is going to move forward here. Shooting is kind of a weird movie. It's a little surreal. Not fully, though. I kind of wish it embraced its surrealism a little more than it does. And it's kind of like oppressive, like somewhat creepy atmosphere that it has, but it only rears up in moments. That's going to hamper it in the next round, I think, but it beats In a Valley of Violence pretty easily. In a Valley of Violence isn't anything too great. And last up in the first round is Appaloosa versus Wind River. I think I'm going to go Wind River, even though that's more of a neo-western, less traditional. Appaloosa, I'm not a huge fan of. And we're moving on to the next round. And there are still some movies that we haven't talked about yet because of the bracket doing that thing where a few got to move forward. Like Bone Tomahawk, we made it to round 2 unscathed. Bone Tomahawk is an easy win here. I'm a huge Scruggs fan. I've talked about all of his movies ad nauseum on this channel. I ran a D&D campaign where we played through Bone Tomahawk. I was the DM for a campaign where 3 people took on the roles of Patrick Wilson, Matthew Fox, and Kurt Russell. They took on those 3 characters, and they played through Bone Tomahawk. That was a lot of fun. Those videos are on the channel. There are 3 parts to it. I'll link it in the description if I remember to. I might forget. Blazing Saddles versus The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The parody westerns run comes to an end here. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is moving on. That is going to be a tough matchup in the next round. Bone Tomahawk versus The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I don't want to think about that yet. McCabe and Mrs. Miller we haven't seen yet versus Once Upon a Time in the West. McCabe and Mrs. Miller is kind of like an anti-western. It's so great though. Once Upon a Time in the West is great as well. I think a lot of people would go Once Upon a Time in the West, but I think I gotta go McCabe and Mrs. Miller. It's powerful. And it's so important to film history in a way that Once Upon a Time in the West isn't quite as important to film history. Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid versus Pale Rider. Pale Rider's are the one that we haven't seen yet. But it's Butch Cassidy all the way. Unforgiven versus For a Few Dollars More. I've said a couple times recently on this channel as I was going through my best picture winners tier list and my couple best movies of all times list. Unforgiven pops up on some of those, and I've said I don't love Unforgiven. I think it's pretty good. For a Few Dollars More, I do love, and For a Few Dollars More is going to beat Unforgiven easily. The Assassination of Jesse James versus The Harder They Fall. Like I said, with The Harder They Fall, I would be surprised if it made it through another round, and it isn't going to. The Assassination of Jesse James is moving forward. Okay, Tombstone versus The Sisters Brothers. I loved The Sisters Brothers more than I expected to. I think it deserves a little more attention than it got, but it can't beat Tombstone. Tombstone's a grade A classic. Quotable, iconic characters. Okay, No Country for Old Men versus the Great Train Robbery, which nobody hadn't seen it. The Great Train Robbery is, this is like the old school, like one of the first movies ever made. Important to cinema history, but it's not gonna move past No Country for Old Men. Okay, over to the other side of the bracket, we have The Hateful Eight versus The Way of the Gun. Both of these are not traditional Westerns. The Hateful Eight has a more traditional Western setting, but it's more of like a murder mystery. The Way of the Gun has a modern setting, but it feels more like a traditional Western in its themes. And I'm going to go with The Way of the Gun, actually, on this one. I have a video essay about The Way of the Gun called The Perfect Blend of Realism and Style, where I break down The Way of the Gun's final shootout. Go check out that video essay to hear more of my thoughts on that movie. Hell or High Water versus The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. It's going to be The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, moving forward. Okay, Dead Man versus Dancing with Wolves. You know what? I'm going Dead Man. I think Dead Man is like a dark horse contender here. I don't think many people would expect it to move forward. I'm moving Dead Man on. I love that Dead Man has made it through 2 rounds so far. Okay, Logan versus The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. I'm going to go Ballad of Buster Scruggs here. It's the Coen Brothers, and it's them doing... The Coen Brothers have 3 movies in here, I just realized. Even though True Grit didn't move on past the first round. Logan's only like barely a Western. I kind of, it was lucky to get past the first round, let's say. Okay, Meek's Cutoff, another one that we haven't talked about yet. Meek's Cutoff versus High Plains Drifter. Meek's Cutoff is decidedly art house. It requires a lot of patience. It's one that I actually want to rewatch now that I've seen a couple other movies from that director, Kelly Reichardt. Because I didn't love Meek's Cutoff when I watched it, but I have loved some of Kelly Reichardt's other movies, and I feel like I get what Meek's Cutoff was going for now, retroactively. So I kind of want to rewatch Meek's Cutoff with that knowledge in mind. But for the time being, I'm going to go with High Plains Drifter. If for no other reason than the Beastie Boys. Okay, Django Unchained versus the Nightingale. The things I said about Nightingale not being a tried and true Western are going to factor in here. Okay, The Good, the Bad, and the Weird versus The Shooting. It's The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. Good, the Bad, and the Weird's moving on. Wind River versus 3:10 to Yuma. 3:10 to Yuma is the last one we haven't talked about. We've now covered all the movies that are in this bracket. 3:10 to Yuma is definitely more of a traditional Western, even though it is still a little more recent. It's kind of old at this point, but it's, still like a neo-Western. 3:10 to Yuma. I watched it not expecting much, and I was quite impressed by it. I don't think it's amazing, but it did pass my expectations. It has a phenomenal final shootout. It has really good characters and really good acting. It's directed by James Mangold, who's a pretty solid director. It's going to take the cake here over Wind River, which is much less of a Western. Wind River is another one like Logan that it was kind of lucky to get past the first round. Okay, and into the next round. What is this quarterfinals? This is the one that I don't even want to think about because I love Bone Tomahawk so much. I really adore it. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, though, it's how can you dethrone The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly? It's the pinnacle of the genre, kind of. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is a contender to make it all the way. So kind of how I said, Proposition and Good, the Bad, and the Weird, I could see going to the finals. I could also see Bone Tomahawk and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly going to the finals. If I was just picking my favorite, I would have to go Bone Tomahawk. But I'm trying to... There's obviously some bias involved. It's obviously, personal opinion has to factor into this. But I am trying to go best versus just favorite. And in that metric, I have to go Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. This is me trying to be as impartial as I can be. Okay, McCabe and Mrs. Miller versus Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. This is a tough pairing. Both great, but I gotta go Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. For a few dollars more versus The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. This is a tough one. I'm going to go with For a Few Dollars More. And it looks like we're going to have a Sergio Leone potentially head-to-head later on in the tournament. But yeah, For a Few Dollars More is moving on. We had Tombstone versus No Country for Old Men. Both great. No Country for Old Men is definitely the better movie. Now it's a question of, does Tombstone being a more thorough Western give it the edge over No Country for Old Men? I think maybe even still No Country for Old Men takes the dub on this one. Way of the Gun versus The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Liberty Valance is the more capital W Western. It's going to move forward for that reason. Okay, Dead Man versus Ballad of Buster Scruggs. I gotta say, I was not expecting Dead Man to move this far through the bracket, but I think it's going to keep going on, man. Dead Man is the underdog, the dark horse of this tournament, and Dead Man's moving on. Dead Man's still going strong. Wow, yeah. Now I'm surprising myself with these picks here because I hadn't thought about these at all. I just put these movies in here, didn't think about what beat what. Django Unchained versus High Plains Drifter. Django Unchained is still moving on. Okay, Good, the Bad, and the Weird versus 310 to Yuma. Again, I consider this one pretty easy, and I'm going to go Good, the Bad, and the Weird. The Good, the Bad, and the Weird is one that I would guess that a lot of people watching probably haven't seen, more people than the other movies on this list. I highly, highly, highly recommend The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. It's well worth checking out. Phenomenal South Korean action movie. Fucking hell, probably the toughest one in the whole tournament. This is probably even harder than, I mean, obviously they're going to get harder as they move along, but this is even harder than Bone Tomahawk versus Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, I think. Butch, Cassidy, and the Sundance Kid is one of my favorite movies of all time. It is my preferred movie out of the two. But the chemistry between Paul Newman and Robert Redford is just so timeless and endlessly watchable, so magnetic. I could just watch those characters all day. And you can kind of say the same about The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Though it's less about chemistry in that one and more about the sparks, the conflict between them. Oh, I think I'm going to make some people mad, but I gotta go Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is the film that almost always takes the top spot on Best Westerns of All Time's lists whenever people compile those. I gotta go Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. I can't factor out my bias all the way on this one. It's got to be Butch Cassidy that wins here. Okay, next up, For a Few Dollars More versus No Country for Old Men. I think I'm going to go No Country for Old Men again. If there's any neo-western that deserves to go all the way, it's No Country for Old Men. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance versus Dead Man. Dead Man had a good run. I think this is where Dead Man comes to an end. It's going to be The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. And Django Unchained versus The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. I'm going to ruffle some feathers. I'm going The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. Fuck it. The Good, the Bad, and the Weird is making a run for the pennant. Is that a sports term? Even though this is in a completely randomized order, it has shook out where whichever one wins this pairing between Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid and No Country for Old Men is going to beat these two. It is still a really tough choice between these two, but it doesn't matter quite as much. I think I'm going to go Good, the Bad, and the Weird because I want more people to see it. I want more people to check out this extremely underrated, grade A South Korean action masterpiece. But it's going to lose to whichever one of these wins. And you know what? We're going to base this on the time period. I think is going to factor into this. And also, I think I got to go Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, I really do consider one of the best movies ever made. Like tippy top, I mean. I would put No Country for Old Men on my personal top 250, but I'd put Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid higher on my personal top 250. And my personal top 250 is in the works. Some people asked for it. And I'm working on it. It's being compiled. It'll still probably take me a while because I want to write something substantial for all 250 movies, so it's going to take me a while, and that one's going to be scripted, so it'll be a while before that comes out, but it is in the works, just so you know. But Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid's going to win there, and it's going to beat The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. So there we have it, the absolute best Western ever made in this 2022 Brickwall Pictures Best Western bracket is Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Going into this, I did not know that. I kind of expected that The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly might win, like a lot of people probably also expected, but I had to go with my heart, and I had to go with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. This is a fun bracket. I'm enjoying doing these brackets. I've just done this one in my Best Directors bracket, which I recommend checking out. Let me know in the comments if you would have made different decisions on these brackets, because I am positive that we disagreed on a number of these. But also let me know in the comments, even more prudently, I would say, any other bracketed tournaments that you would like to see for any kind of movie-related subjects, and I will put them together. Subscribe and stick around. I'll see you next time. So long.